Hi, Andrew and Daniel.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, yeah, you're up and running. Fantastic.
Do we sound okay?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, excellent. Oh no, fantastic. Well, I think Michael won't be too far away. Yeah, oh no, good. Should be good. We've got a few people have replied, so you know, just hopefully they'll all turn up. So I've had over 40 people keen to attend, so yeah.
Ooh. What about turn the back ones on? Turn the back ones on. Can you pull it over?
Would make it more proportioned.
Yeah. More level. That's probably better. That seems better. Actually,
Up a little bit.
probably here or something.
Going up a little bit. Yeah.
I don't think so. Oh. Making some adjustments here.
Kylie? Yeah, that's good.
Hi, Kylie.
How you going?
Has your I got on, Kylie, so that was good.
Yes, we're all good. I'm up on lighting.
Oh God.
Oh well, it's not much
We'll
better.
leave our bit. We're having dinner, and I'm sure you don't want to see us having dinner.
Yeah, no. Hi David, how are you?
Hi, David.
Hi, David. How you going?
Hey, yeah, good, thanks. I think.
Yeah.
Still light at your place?
Not quite. I changed my virtual background. And I think you were seeing cows before, or yearlings.
No, cows are better. Cows are better.
Cows are good.
Cows. Where are my cows? There they are.
How are you, Michael?
Yeah, all good. I'm here,
Yeah.
which is always a relief in these circumstances.
It is. Yeah.
G'day, Michael.
Yeah, hey Andrew, how are we?
Pretty good.
G'day, Michael.
Hey Daniel, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank
That's
you.
a shot. So how have things been going down that way? Desmoors?
Yeah, pretty well actually. It's been quite a good autumn break.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of feed around, which is nice.
Mm.
Yeah, it looks amazing, really.
Yeah, I haven't been down there for, can't remember when I was there last actually. Warren Do probably a fortnight ago.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't go past there, but yeah, no, things look pretty good that way.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Bit more rain on the way too.
Yeah, is there? Yeah, right. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, yeah. Out this way, we could do with some more. Like it's good, but yeah, yeah, we always need more, I suppose.
Yeah, can't knock it back.
Oh, well, we'll all be coming to visit you in Wagga anyway, Michael, because I think we're banned from Albury now.
Yeah, you're not going south. Yeah. What
No.
did you notice anything in Holbrook today? Was it quiet or was it?
No, it's I think quite busy.
Yeah.
This afternoon was, this morning was dead. So
Yeah.
people coming across. But, yeah, no, anyway, heart goes out to all the businesses and everybody because that's, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a struggle, I think.
Yeah, I think that the reality of another, 6 weeks lockdown in Melbourne's going to, take the shine off it.
Yeah.
I've got a brother who's got a cafe down there, and they sort of struggled for the first fortnight of that initial lockdown, and then actually things turned around pretty quickly for them. And the last month has been better than normal, but I think it's going to hit them again this time now somehow.
Yeah, yeah. No, for
Anyway,
sure.
that's what happens.
We're all
Yeah.
It puts ag in a pretty good spot, though, really, doesn't it? You just think that the isolation thing, you can actually manage it pretty well if you got a bit organised. But yeah, I think we're in a pretty lucky position in a lot of ways.
Very much.
You're very lucky. Yeah. All still got jobs and and everything sort of, yeah, is good for us for sure. So yes. Okay, I'm flashing unstable. I'm just going to turn my video off, maybe, just in case.
It's always a challenge when you get public scrutiny on how you operate. So what I think we'll do firstly is we'll all watch the video that has been produced as part of this project. Now, Phoebe, can you put that in the chat?
It's in the chat. It's in the
that's
chat.
good.
So just go to the chat box and click on that link, and it's about 5 minutes long. So we won't run it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So what the best thing to do we found with this is click on the link in the chat, and we'll play it on the screen, but it always takes, it's very slow. So click on the link, watch it on your own screen, and then come back here. And then after that, we'll basically start the discussion. We'll start with a bit of background on the business, and then, but by all means, if you've got questions that you want to ask, put them in the chat, like Phoebe said. And I'm really, I'm really hoping that discussion can flow from the video. So we'll throw to that now. Yeah, righto. Well, hopefully everyone's back from that. You finished at your end there, Phoebe? Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, well, good work on the video there, Andrew and Daniel. I know it's always horrible seeing yourself on the film, especially with a big buff head like I've got. But anyway, you did well. Now, yeah, so I suppose to get into it, I think, you know, the starting point for us is a little bit of background about what the operation you run, and then, you know, we'll target in on, you know, your enterprise and why you've made these decisions to change over the last few years. So yeah, just probably Andrew, just a bit of background on where you've been, what you've been up to, and how you got to this point.
Yeah, righto. Thanks, Michael. We came to Holbrook 30 years ago. I think most people know the story. Prior to that, we were dairy farming up near Picton, near Sydney, and we couldn't expand there, and you could sell out there and buy a lot more land down here and not have to worry about milking cows. And so that was 1990. When we came, the place, the pastures were pretty run down. There was a couple of Phalaris paddocks, but mostly it was run down. There was a lot of big bulrushes and a lot of silvergrass. The phosphorus levels were very low. We started putting super out. We ran, to start, we had a few cattle and a few sheep, and it was probably less than half the number of what we had 10 years later. Yeah, and over the years we've been able to buy more land, and now Daniel, my son's in operation. I've got another son who's very keen as well. He's still at school, unfortunately for him. We run, this year we'll probably cover about 2,000 cows, and we normally trade a couple of thousand head a year as well. In the past, we used to sell our steers to feedlots, and there'd always be a big rush on at the end of spring, or if the spring was cutting out, to get rid of them. And then the last few years, we've started, well, we fed if we didn't have enough grass to finish them, we'll finish them on grain and silage, basically, and a few other additives. And also, like in these dry periods, going back, like we had the bad drought in 2006, 2007. We just, in the end, I fed everything for 1 year, and then I'd had enough of it, so we sold a heap of cattle the next year. Rather than doing that now, we just we do feed everything right through. We pull everything off the paddocks when it starts to get tight, and we have them in containment areas basically and feed them. And you say something?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks, Michael and Phoebe. I guess I've been here since I was born, so been very blessed in that regard. Finished school in year 10, decided I didn't want to do any more, and came back to the farm. So that was 11 years ago, and then in the meantime I went to uni for 4 years in Wagga and did ag business. Yeah, and just enjoying being on the farm, I guess, at the moment.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good insight. So with your cattle operation, is it when are you calving, and then what are the decisions you're making through, in terms of keeping progeny?
Joining bulls from the start of November to a week before Christmas. So calving will start at the end of this month. Decision-wise, I suppose selecting low birth weight bulls is critical, particularly in heifers, but just as critical, if not more so, is the management of the condition score of the cows and the heifers. So keeping them from not getting too fat, which means running them hard, but not so hard that you have losses of calves before birth. So it's a pretty tight balancing act, but I suppose it works well calving in the spring, that the quality of the feed is quite high. So even though if you're grazing it short, what they are getting is good quality.
We have composite cattle, and we breed our own bulls, have done since the 1990s. AI, our better cows, to top Simmental, top Angus bulls, and top composite bulls. A little bit of shorter ones sometimes.
And then the aim with them is to self-replacing, but also you're growing your steer progeny out and or heifer progeny, like excess heifer, or?
Yeah, well, we keep a fair portion of the heifers to breed from, but the steers, yeah, we grow them out. Like we used to sell them to feedlots, and I suppose it was low to mid 400 kilos, and now we'll go as far as we can on grass, and then we'll feed them a bit more, and they're like averaging over 600 kilos. So like.
Michael, just check the chat box. There's just a few questions coming through.
Yeah, I will, Phoebe. Thank you. So I suppose one of the other things, trying to tie in with some of these questions, is what's the decision-making process you're making? You're saying you're prepared to take livestock off country and finish them in a confinement area. Is that young stock and or cows? And then what's the process that you go through to plan to do that, and also potentially the time frame that you budget on for them being in that confinement area?
Oh, well as short as possible, but it starts off, we'd start off feeding the steers, or any steers that we haven't finished, on grass, which has been a fair few the last few years. And that's normally it's normally January. Last year it was December. And then we'll wean the calves, and that's, if it's a good year, they might get weaned till April, but the last few years it's been January, February. Feed them, and then start feeding the cows if we have to. We don't like doing it, but we've had to do that the last 2 years as well. And that was February, March. So not all the cows were fed, but a fair portion of them was.
And are you making that decision sort of based on a ground cover estimate, or are you just sort of doing it, by feel, or what's?
Yeah, based on a ground cover. So maintaining a minimum of 70%, ideally higher than that. In 06, 07, I remember seeing the paddocks blow away. The tops of the paddocks. I guess that's where we came to that point to that this wasn't working in the droughts, having them on the paddocks, and so I've been locking them up in the dry years, in the not the better years. But those paddocks, that some of the topsoil that was blown off was was the confined areas, not the whole farm. So we're always doing it to some extent. But now we're doing it even in a more confined sense, like a few hectares as opposed to 20 or 30 hectares for a mob.
No, but if there's not much ground cover and you feed cattle in the paddock, they just pound it up and then you get wind and it does blow away. So you're better off pulling them off.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so how's that fitting then into your pasture renovation? So what's your decision-making process there in terms of, are you keeping records of carrying capacity of paddocks and then saying, well, right, well, these paddocks are dropping out or dropping down in performance, we'll pull them in, or you making those decisions based on soil test information? What's the process involved in actually replacing a pasture?
Yeah, primarily based on species composition. So I guess walking through or riding through the paddock specifically to check it, but also just taking note whenever we're moving stock or checking fences or whatever, and seeing what weeds are present and at what intensity. And so the good Phalaris subclavian paddocks, they're always carrying more and they're performing quite well. And then some paddocks, as they are getting overrun, or start Cape weed populations building up, or silvergrass, monitoring that and controlling it. And then we've tried to, this year, in the last few years, we've put in, like, say, a cover crop, I suppose, of rye corn and oats to bulk up the paddocks, the Phalaris paddocks that are thinning out. Saw an interesting webinar MLA did a little while back, and one of the guys was saying there that there's probably a lot more value in your Phalaris subclavian pasture than you think. So even though it looks thin, if you can bulk it up, you're probably better off to a certain point than spraying it out, because there's a very big opportunity cost of that first year where you really only get one grazing, and that's massive. So it takes several years to pay back that new pasture.
Yeah, and we've also had like ryegrass and perennial and annual ryegrasses in the mix. This is in the short-term pastures, and we used canola last year. This year we used
Tillage
radish. Yeah. And like I've always been keen to try new things, like coming from dairying. And when we first came here, we had wet summers and we had a lot of white clover, and perennial ryegrass would last for a long time. We tried cocksfoot and different paddocks, but I mean, after a drought, the only really good pastures that are really left is Australian Phalaris and subclover. I mean, we'll keep putting the other things in, but for short-term stuff, but you just can't bank on them staying there forever.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, that those mainstays have stood the test of time, I suppose. So do you cut any, the fodder that you're feeding out to the livestock in confinement, is that coming on farm? Are you buying all that in? Like, what's the process that you're making there, the decision you're making?
A combination of the two. So traditionally, and we still do now, make a lot of silage, as you can get a high quality product. So we've got the gear set up, the equipment, the infrastructure to do that. So making silage heaps and pits. Also do a little bit of hay strategically, and then all grain is bought in. So depending on the price per unit of energy, wheat or barley predominantly. This year, the last couple of years, it's been barley. Also canola meal from Riverina Oils at Wagga. And we have used cottonseed and various other things in the past based on price.
And have you got the capacity there to make a TMR, total mixed ration there? Then you can analyse that and make it up to suit to what the animals need.
That's right. Yeah. So Dad consults with an animal nutritionist, and we've got a 6-ton mixer we tow behind the tractor. Works quite well over summer. Does work when it gets a little bit, when you get those first autumn break, but it gets a bit boggy, so that's a bit of a limiting factor there. But after not too long, the grass does take away, so you can get them out of those confinement areas. But yeah, we're doing all the mixing on site.
Yeah, and then that transition, then what are the other what are the factors that you're making to say, right, we'll let stock out now, and then what do you do from a class perspective? Like, is any of the production stocks, say your steers or heifers, are they leaving the confinement, or are they being sold direct to slaughter from there? And how's that fit in?
A bit of both. Some are being sold straight to slaughter sort of every week, having a load or so go. So that's happening as they are ready, like drafting them up, putting them in pens to suit their when they're ready to go. And then some of those will get carried on depending on the autumn break, essentially. If it's an early break, then a lot more will be able to finish on grass. Later break, more will get finished on grain. Also look, factor in the price of grain as well, and as to how long it's worth feeding them for. If there's still grass, letting it get ahead a bit more or not.
Yeah. No,
But the other thing is too, like knowing you, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. You go.
I was just going to say, knowing you can finish them, like last spring, we knew it was going to cut out early, but like in late August, September, we had a fair bit of feed, and like there was a lot of cheap cattle around then. We were able to buy a heap, and knowing that if you had to finish on grass, you wouldn't have been able to, but because we could just do that final finish on with grain and that, it made the grass section of the whole thing very profitable.
Yeah, it was an interesting spring that where the trade market was, there was a lot of opportunities there, which was good. And that's still all worked out from a financial perspective, you know, the cost of feeding and the markets that you could place those animals back into then.
Oh yeah, no worries at all. Yeah.
So how are you measuring that, you know, that financial performance, either, you know, from a days on feed and even, you know, how do you go back to create a gross margin for your enterprise, your cattle breeding enterprise into the paddock? What type of information do you record there, and how do you sort of measure that as a business?
Yeah, well, for the cattle on feed, I mean, I just got a spreadsheet, and it's pretty simple, really. You just, it takes about, depending on the size of the animal, it takes 7 to 8 kilos of feed to put a kilo on them. So, you know, it feeds $300 a tonne, well, it's going to cost $2.10 a kilo. So at the moment, it's even, you know, it's a good option. And then when cattle were cheaper, grain was a lot cheaper too. So it paid then. But I mean, you know, there's been times when there's not a big margin in it, but if you have the cattle are utilising the grass and putting the weight gain on the grass, you're not having to sell them unfinished. You're able to finish them, even if there's a small margin in it. It's sort of complemented the grass feeding operation.
Yeah, and I can see how that can fit in with the decision making of, you know, maintaining that cover on your pastures, how that can all flow in together. Got a really good question here from Lucinda Corrigan. It says, Andrew, you have made some very astute moves over the years. What would you say are the most important future business success in reaching your family goals? Which in typical Lucinda style is very probing.
I'll probably reduce debt. That's the main priority at the moment.
Yeah,
I would say,
Daniel for a second.
from observation, being careful where the money goes, not spending on things that aren't going to get a return for your investment. So being wise in that regard, and not just following fads or trends for the sake of it because they seem attractive at the time, but keeping your eyes on the prize and being good at focusing what you're doing and being good at it, I suppose.
So on some of those trends, I suppose, where do you go then for good, reliable information? What are you seeing? Who do you seek information off? You know, when does your bullshit radar come up? Where do you sort of, you know, where do you seek information there in that regard?
I would say it's part art, part science. Some of the things you can look up on the internet, talk to advisors, such as local agronomists, which we do.
Other farmers.
Yeah, and I think probably the art part comes down to experience and knowing what works on your property in this area. Yeah, coming into an area, there's a lot to learn, whereas if you've been there for a few years, I guess you get a feel for what works and observe and record and see what worked, what didn't, and be willing to try new things.
Yeah, that sounds great. So how does that fit in then from a climate risk perspective? what do you think are the big things that are going to, you know, increase the risk of your business, you know, in the next 10, 20, 30 years in the context around a changing climate? What are the factors that you see as really critical to focus on?
Well, the climate doesn't worry me at all. You can say something.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michael. I suppose we're solely a beef producing business, so there's a lot of risk played there. So there's probably one of the biggest risk factors is the price of beef, which I know doesn't come back to the climate straight away, but that's probably the key factor. And seasonal variability is a long-standing thing. I've always had to deal with it. I guess it comes down to it comes down to quite a few things, but having a good pasture base, that still is the backbone of what we do. That even though we do feed and finish, that adds to it. But the pastures is the big ticket item that you want to get right. So I guess having those species that are going to last, but also being willing to put in species like rye corn and oats and whatnot, which are going to give you that quick feed when you do get your autumn break. Being ready to sow it if it's an early autumn break. Putting things in over summer to utilise that summer rainfall. So sorghum, millet, things along those lines. So you're not wasting, I guess, as much water. Maintaining the ground cover is going to help with retaining water in terms of loss. The soil's not going to get as hot. The wind's not going to affect as much. So you will have more of that moisture in there that does fall. You'll also get less runoff. It'll more will soak in and soak through. So I guess, yeah, there's probably some key things. I'm sure there's more. I can't think off the top of my head now.
I think that's a really good, really good overview, Daniel. A lot of those soil health principles are, I think fundamental for that, maintaining resilience especially in a grazing business. Focus on soil health is, it's extremely important. Got a question here from the ever reliable Dale about, are there other potential pasture species or mixes that you think we need more information or research on? You might help deal with current or future seasonal trends. So what's the next silver bullet from, what's the next Australian Phalaris variety or something along those lines that's going to save everyone?
Well, we can't help you there. That's I think Australian Phalaris is probably the best, really. Well, it's definitely the most persistent. It's not the most productive.
Yeah, and that's a hard question too, because you can develop a new variety, but to test persistence, it takes decades. So what might seem good in 5 to 10 years may be gone in 20 years. That could be the difference between great and not so good. We've been put some tillage radish in for the first time this year. The idea behind that is supposed to break up the soil as the root goes down. It pushes out and helps break up compaction. So that'll be interesting to see if that helps, how that helps. And it will also leave root channels. So when we plant our future permanent pasture, even just temporary pastures, all the microbes and whatnot will chew away at that, and then they'll have a channel for the next roots to go down, hopefully through any hard layers, and that'll also bring up nutrients from down further that weren't potentially accessed as much before. So I don't know, there's probably not a heap of research about that at the moment. I think it's utilised quite a lot overseas, particularly in America. So I'd be curious to see over the next few years how that does play out.
Yeah, the whole multi-species cropping is a bit of a data-free zone at the moment. There's a lot of anecdotal information being thrown around with some reasonable success, but yeah, the science community's sort of yet to embrace that. But it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully there'll be some money flow in from a research and development perspective into that area. What's your sort of paddock selection for you to make that decision in terms of why would you go down? Is that part of a paddock leaning towards renovation, or is that something in a shorter term pasture that you've decided to thicken up with the radish, or how does that work?
Yeah, both, bit of both. We put it in all our shorter term mixes, like just annual ryegrass, oats, rye corn mixes where we'll make silage out of most of them. And they've really taken off because we got them in nice and early while it was still warm. they've already had a grazing or two off some of those. And then also a couple of paddocks that are starting to thin out with phalaris. They're certainly not thinning out enough that you'd spray them out, but potentially looking down the track years to come, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it might be, when we go and put the permanent pasture phalaris subclaver back in that, hopefully the soil will be in a better position than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, so on the soil, question here from Kylie about, you mentioned lime. How do you decide? Hang on, it's just disappeared on me. Too many questions coming in. And once again, thank you for asking a few questions, because it makes my role as a facilitator reasonably easy. Yeah, so how do you decide that it's, or is it a rule of thumb that you're doing individual soil tests per paddock? How much, have you done any variable rate liming applications? What do you just throw out 2.5 tonnes and hope for the best, or where does that sort of fit?
Yeah, we put 2.5 tonne a hectare out. We're trying to get around the place every 10 years, basically, and that seems to be what we need to maintain it from when we did those soil tests through Wybalena every year for a few years. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it takes longer, and we are up to the 3rd time round with some paddocks.
And I guess Dad probably did more soil testing when he came here, which I don't remember, and got a feel for how things responded and what it needed. So I'm probably a bit more keen. We have been doing it for the last few years, but to do a few more paddocks and track as we apply lime, yeah, and track how the pH falls. And I think variable rate is something that I'd be interested in down the track, but I think at the moment probably just need to get the variable rate on a paddock by paddock basis a bit better fine-tuned, and then move to within paddock.
Well, I'd probably say just put the same mat out and just vary the number of years until the next time you do it. As far as super goes,
what other fertiliser are you putting out? Are you putting annual applications of phosphorus? Do you apply nitrogen on fodder crops? How does that sort of pan out, and what are the decisions, the decision making around that?
Yeah, well, when we first came, we just put bag to the acre of super for a couple of years, and then the mid to late 90s, that triple P started taking off, and so we went a fair few, I don't know, 5 or 6 years there, and put 200, 250 kilos a hectare over the whole place. So the P levels are really lifted, and since then it's been more of a maintenance. We've basically, I think in 30 years we've only missed 2 years. One, it was too wet. The other one was a really bad drought after 06. So at the moment we're just yeah, it's around, we're doing like, well, I think this year we only did 100 kilos a hectare actually on most of the place, except on some of the newer country we put 125 on that. And I did do potassium on hay paddocks going back to silage paddocks years ago. Then decided we're probably better off rotating the paddocks rather than just doing the one paddock every year, or the same paddocks every year. As far as these, I see there was a question there about the pens and the manure. Yeah, we've started to get some big piles of manure. We've done a little bit of spreading that. I mean, there's a great opportunity there to put fertility back into the soils.
Is that something that you'd look into, potentially composting that and then putting that back out as such? Is that?
Yeah, and we've done a little bit of it, and it'll go through our normal spreader, so mainly. So it's just getting the time to do it's probably more the thing. You can't do it in the middle of summer because it'll blow, or it's too dry and just blow away. And you don't want to do it when it's really wet in the middle of winter because it compacts the paddocks. So. And the other times of the year, you're busy doing other stuff.
Yeah, right. No, that's fair.
Urea, yeah, we do apply it to those grazing crops about twice, once or twice for each of those. And depending on the price of urea and the feed demand that we have, we'll apply it on the pasture paddocks, some of the pasture paddocks, not all of them, some of the better performing ones as well.
Yeah, so and what type of response are you sort of been expecting? Like, you know, how many kilos of N as such would you be putting on, and then what type of dry matter production would you be expecting from that?
Oh, well, I work on 12 kilos of dry matter per kilo, actual kilo of N, which is just stuff I've seen from trials. We would put out like 40 to 50 kilos of N, like that's, 100 kilos of urea to the hectare. We may do some cropping paddocks twice in a year. We've done pasture paddocks just to try and get the grasses grown to sort of help with the bloat, but it don't really work.
And we
It makes the
also
grass grow, but you still get bloat.
have been using ProGib for quite a few years as well. Gibberellic acid.
Yeah, so how's the ProGib been fitting in? Is that you've been doing that in the depths of winter to sort of elongate the stem to increase your winter production?
That's right. Yeah. So often, not always with a broadleaf control at the same time. For Cape weed, Patterson's curse, wire weed, depending on what weeds are in the paddock, make use of that pass, or even by itself, or with an insecticide if the paddock needs it, depending on the red-legged earthmite and lucerne flea populations and time of the year, if it's really cold or warm still. I went out and we just got a pasture meter, rising plate pasture meter about a month ago, and just been playing with that and been quite interesting. And one of the paddocks that had ProGib on it, and it also had a broadleaf spray on it, so that would have knocked it a little bit that got missed. Had 2 tonne to the hectare roughly, and the bit that got done with ProGib and broadleaf was 2.5 tonne. That was about 3 or 4 weeks ago it was sprayed, so that's a pretty significant increase.
Yeah, like when ProGib first came out and we used it, I thought it was fantastic, and it is. It makes the feed grow, but it really worries me that it affects the longevity of phalaris and stuff. They just seems to put everything into the leaf, and it must cut the roots back or something. Yeah, that worries me about it a bit. So we've cut back on it a bit.
Yeah, right. I'm not exactly aware of that. I don't know if there's anyone else on the call who could talk to that. But yeah, I know there's been concerns with some of the newer varieties of phalaris and their persistence. I think, that goes into a larger conversation around probably grazing management and persistence in that. There's a lot of other factors that go into that. And also, some of these dry seasons that we've been having, that if you get accumulation of those, well, it's going to impact on the persistence of perennial pastures. Probably just touching on the grazing management side of it, what do you tend to do, like from a grazing perspective, how you're running your cows, and then also then with your trading stock and or finishing, like when they're out on pastures, what do you do there?
Yeah, well, we much prefer to rotationally graze, but every time we try to do it on a large scale, we seem to run into some sort of problem. So, I mean, a lot of them are just on like a 3 or 4 paddock rotation. And then there's some other paddocks. We've found, the last couple of years, a lot of trouble with bloat, and we found we're just better off doing a lot of set stocking, which is not the best thing for pastures, but the cattle just seem to get used to the paddock they're in, and you lose less. Yeah, young cattle on the crops, they're getting rotated around at the moment. We've got a couple of lots we're using actual little electric fences, just trying to move them around, limit how much they can get each day, well, from a bloat point of view. Yeah, so, and the other thing is with especially the high intensity rotational grazing, it all goes well until it rains in the middle of winter here, and then you finish up with, if it's a 2-acre area, it's just all totally bogged for a few days until it starts to dry out again.
Yeah.
And like they say, the pasture recovers, but I mean, the paddock's always rough after that happens.
Yeah, right.
So,
I might just answer a few more questions that are coming in, and I actually like Sandy's. Sandy usually doesn't give me too much, but he's given me a bit tonight because it's a really great opportunity to plug a project that Wybalena Local Land Services has got running at the moment, although to its credit, it's actually basically fully subscribed for 5 years, where we are doing some precision ag variable rate mapping of liming in perennial pasture paddocks, primarily east of Wagga, and they're doing it, taking samples of 0 to 10 and then 10 to 20, and the producers participating in that are getting a $200 a hectare up to maximum 50 hectares subsidy. And then as long as they sow down a perennial pasture, that stays there for 10 years. And it's really only early days in that project. It's only the second year of it, but very interesting that some of the data that is coming back in that. And also what will be very interesting in that project, which probably comes on to Sandy's next question, is about the effectiveness of putting on large amounts of lime. I know some of the data that we saw, you know, up to 10 tonnes a hectare of variable rate lime in areas, and how that is going to be absorbed and ameliorated into the soil. I might just read this question from Sandy out, and then have a stab at it, Andrew. It says, have you been subsoiling pH checking where you have never put Phalaris varieties? If you have tried the newer ones, Aussie Phalaris were bred about the 1930s. Would you use genetics or cattle genetics from the 1930s? Dry matter production has newer ones with half the payback period, and I reckon they're getting the short straw as the liming history is pretty good. There seems to be subsoil issues that may not have been there 30 years ago when Phalaris was Australian Phalaris was everyone's favourite variety. So I think, summarising that, Sandy, see now.
Yeah, there's actually a fair few questions. That's more than one question, but Australian, well, we never sow Australian Phalaris on its own. We always put other varieties in, and it's been Holdfast. Well, yeah, Holdfast GT more recently, and we used the old Holdfast and Serosa and all sorts of things. And they all grow more than Australian Phalaris. There's no doubt about that, but they just don't seem to persist. We have done soil tests and test the subsoil. We did a lot back when they had that acid soils project years ago. We've done some recent ones, haven't we?
Not in the last couple of years.
Well, the subsoil is always more acid than the topsoil. I know that. What's the other question? Sorry.
I suppose he's just asking whether there's been paddocks that you have tested the subsoil in that haven't had Phalaris in, and whether there's a correlation there between the acidity with the response to the Phalaris pasture.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Sandy. I'd actually be quite curious as to maybe doing a little bit of trying around that area and seeing what happens. I wonder about the economics of getting the lime down to that depth. I think that'd be a long-term process. For what I've read, it takes about a year to move down 1 centimetre down the profile, and to ameliorate subsoil acidity, you got to do it at decent rates for several years, which we have been doing. So it would be interesting to take some more subsoil samples and see how they compare, and potentially getting a paddock that has a decent subsoil and sowing a couple of different varieties side by side. And I guess that's a long game, but seeing what does happen, that's a great point.
Yeah, Sandy, do you want to add anything to that at all, or if you're in your pajamas?
Yeah, good. I just reckon we're probably shit canning a lot of these new Phalaris varieties, but we're putting them onto country that we've got subsoil issues, whereas 30 years ago, when we were sowing, we probably didn't have the acidification that we've had back then. So we're hitting these tighter springs plus an acid band down low that's probably putting the screws on things. And I reckon I'm seeing just as much Aussie Phalaris drop out after the last couple of years, but it's been pretty tough. But I just think they're probably copying a hard sort of analysis that our pH, well, I'd imagine it's a hell of a lot worse at depth now than what it was 30 years ago. Yeah.
Well, we did a heap of sampling, and it was in the late 90s. I just about did every paddock on the farm at that stage. So, I mean, they could be redone again, or some could be redone again and be able to see the difference.
Yeah, well, I think
Sorry.
There's a reasonable amount of research being done. I know, well, Helen Burns I think she's doing a project with you guys at the moment, isn't she?
Yeah, look, we do have a substantial amount of acid soil work going on. So yeah, we'd be really interested to have a look at that. And I remember that the Healthy Soils program from the early 2000s. I mean, that data still exists. You know, we could go back and look at some paddocks too, and just try and get some trends. And that'd be a great thing to do. Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that, you know, certainly coming out of the cropping space in and around the multi-species cropping is the impact that the biology is actually having on the root zone. And that's, in some ways, there's evidence there that Joel Williams has been talking about, where the root zone's been modified by the biology and going through those acidic throttles and then getting into that subsoil. So that's another whole area again, but I don't think that's as applicable, in all honesty, in the perennial pasture space as it probably is in the cropping space. But anyway, that's that's another topic, I suppose. So I was trying to get back a little bit on. There's a few other questions here which we can touch on. And I like your point, Bruce, of saying that there's usually nothing for free. That's probably one of the guarantees in agriculture, which is quite astute. David's asking me here, how do you control silvergrass in established pasture? That you don't want to, you know, nuke it too much, but you still want to control the silvergrass. How do you go about that? And I suppose probably just flowing on from that is how, you know, is silvergrass one of those grasses that, you know, is that the decision you're making when it becomes silvergrass, maybe rhodium dominant, that you're saying, right, well, this paddock's out of here, it'll go to a fodder crop, or, you know, it'll be on the list to sort of slow down?
Control with simazine, which will knock the grasses around, but it won't kill the phalaris.
Silvergrass is not, like, we have a couple of paddocks that it's a problem, but overall it's not a major problem really.
Yeah, oh, that's good to hear. That's great. Yeah,
Well,
right. Well, we'll put the call out now on if there is any other questions. But the thing I would really like to ask, yeah, if there is any questions that you want to ask Andrew or Daniel, put them in the chat. I think that's been working reasonably well. I'm happy to keep things in there as transparent as you can. I'll probably just ask, we'll probably try and finish up in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. So probably just trying to get back to the core of the discussion. Where are we, like, putting yourself forward in 10 years, 15 years time? What are the things, the decisions you're making now that you think, right, this is setting our business up from a risk management perspective, production perspective? Where do you see what you're doing now, putting you in that strong position in, say, 15 years time?
Yeah, I suppose at risk of sound like a broken record, probably healthy pastures, good composition. So when there is the tough years, there's not as many bare patches for weeds to take off. It's been set up with the infrastructure and machinery for the feeding. I think we've got the option there that anytime we can pull it out and we can start feeding, we're good to go. We've done it before. We know how to do it, what's required. Don't know everything about it. We know, like, the ins and outs, some of the risks. Made a few mistakes, I suppose, along the way, and learnt from that. Yeah, I guess trying to implement best practice in everything we do, I suppose, sums it up.
Yeah, righto. Well, that sounds pretty good. So from a climate risk perspective,
No, you'll be doing it in 15 years.
From a climate risk, now, Andrew, you came across as an Alan Jones listener there just before about your attitude towards the climate, which everyone's got to respect. What do you? How do you deal with the situation as it is? Then is it going to be just back to the 90s where everything was hunky dory, or how do you? At what point in the season do we make the decision? Oh, look, we could be in for another 2006 here, or we could have a really good year. What are the factors that are making your as the season's progressing, and even, you know, probably this season's one of those at the moment where we're probably in a really good spot, and it's probably only because we've got it over the head for a couple of years in a row that you're holding back a bit. You know, what decisions are you making to say, well, we're in a good spot?
Oh, well, that was a fair few questions too, but look, I'm not an Alan Jones listener, whoever he is. I think the whole, I don't want to get in an argument about climate change. I think the climate's always been changing, and, you know, it may be warming, but I think there's a lot of hype around it. And I think, like, I've always been interested in the weather records, and I've got the ones for Holbrook going back to about 1885, and you go back from, and like, there's always been dry periods, and they've always been different times of the year, and there's been bad droughts, and you know, I think everything that's happening, it's all happened before. So that, I mean, that doesn't worry me. Obviously the carbon level has gone up, but carbon makes grass grow, so that's a good thing from a grass grower's point of view, really. At what point in the season do we make decisions? Well, we're just sort of monitoring it all the way through, I suppose. And well, to me, this year looks pretty good. I listen a bit to the long-range weather forecast, but they're not always right. Yeah, I'd say this year's looking all right.
Yeah, so how much of a role does pasture budgeting play in that? Then you've touched on before, you've got a petrometer now, is it, Daniel? So, you know, do you do monthly pasture budgets? So you're sort of allocating, you know, how many days of feed you've got ahead of you, or, you know, what triggers are you going to be putting stock into confinement?
Yeah, not as much pasture budgeting as I'd probably like. I think I'm still getting my head around it all, and this pasture meter, rising plate meter, will help to quantify what you're eyeballing. I think Dad sort of did that when he's about my age, so he can look at it and he's got a pretty good idea of what's going on, and sort of got a map out in his head about what goes where and how it all play out. I guess that's a skill I've got to learn. So yeah, I'll be looking towards more pasture budgeting to put a quantitative number, I guess, on what you're seeing in the paddock.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Yeah, you just as the year, especially once you get into August, like, you know, if you hadn't had any runoff in August and the rainfall's been way below average, and then you really got to start planning for the spring to cut out then. And like if it's way below, like 2 years ago, we contracted a lot of grain and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's sensible. That's sensible. I'll just ask this. Well, I'll probably do a Tony Jones and take this as a comment, Bruce. But yeah, it is a very valid though. Just to note, climate change is all about increasing frequency of events rather than the degree of variability. So that's very true, Bruce. Which is, yeah, and that's exactly right. I think we're probably, the things that is occurring is that we are, you know, we probably can get rain any day of the year, and we can probably get any amount at any day of the year. And we want to be setting up a business that's got hopefully the cover on the ground to be able to handle any type of storm and utilise that moisture as best as it can. So yeah,
Sandy. Oh, sorry, Sandy's got a question there. Have I looked into moisture probes? Yes, a little bit. I'm still looking around and potentially could get one. I do occasionally look at the one, there's one at Glenfalloch near here, and also have a soil water app which you drags in the rainfall data, and you put your soil data type and all the rest, and it tells you how much theoretically you should have left, so that gives you a ballpark too.
Yeah, that's great. So you're using those type of decisions to, with that, pulling that data in to make that, if you're starting to reduce soil moisture, then you're correlating that to reduced grass production, and that's probably the measurement. Are there any other questions there as such? Because we've just gone past 8 o'clock, conscious of the time, but also, yeah, I don't want to leave people short. But give you a minute or two to get any questions in. If there's anything else, any last minute sort of snippets of wisdom you want to leave us with, Andrew or Daniel?
Not particularly. I suppose, yeah, one thing is what we do here works for us. It's probably not for everyone, not for every location, and not for every personal situation. Got to look at what your assets, your natural assets are, I suppose, and your personnel assets, and make that assessment. It's a fairly constant feeding. You can't take a day off when you're doing it in the middle of summer. So in some instances, it might be better to sell those stock and accept that for some people. I don't want to say this is the be all end all, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing is, once you feed grain to anything, it disqualifies you from a lot of grass-fed programs, from those premiums. Yeah, and then you can't get a premium for having grain fed because you're not a registered feedlot.
So where do you actually market that product then as such? Do you have to market direct to slaughter as such?
Yeah.
Do you have a reasonable volume coming through?
We sell the majority of our stuff goes to supermarkets.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, as supplemented. If they're supplemented, otherwise they're grass fed, but they're not the premium grass fed because they some stage in their life they might have had grain or something.
Yeah, that sounds good. There's a couple of comments here. I think probably the answering the question, John, the trigger for drought lotting is probably based on a ground cover assessment. I think from what Daniel said before, sort of about a 70%. Is that about right, Daniel, that you're looking at?
Yeah, or at least. Yeah, dry matter. So in terms of what's actually there and the ground cover, definitely more than 70 if possible. You just got to balance up with all the factors on your farm. I suppose you can't always get it perfect every time. There's a lot of constraints in terms of time and your areas that you can do it in.
You don't want to have to do too much before Christmas when it comes to feeding.
Yeah, that's a good point. One other final question here from Jan. Daniel, hi, Andrew and Daniel. What were the factors that made you choose the farm? That you did choose when you moved from Picton. So I suppose, what was the attraction to Holbrook? Yeah,
well, we looked at other areas, and we looked in the Central West, and we looked in New England, and someone said, a friend of Dad said, "Oh, why don't you have a look around Holbrook?" So we had a look, and it just so happened the farm came up for auction, and we had a budget, and it was within the budget, so this is where we finished up. But look, I reckon it's a fantastic area. The only problem is, I think Andrew Hicks told me once that by the time the drought gets to Holbrook, there's nowhere else to send your cattle to. So, but no, Holbrook's a fantastic area, and it's been great for us.
Well suited to beef production and sheep to some extent too. East of the highway, cropping gets a bit hard in terms of waterlogging.
No, that's true. Yeah, there's been that's been tried a few times. I'll just touch on Nick's point. The Holbrook Landcare website, it's got information on acid soils, on the acid soils project, so that'll be a good resource. No doubt you're all in going to the Holbrook Landcare website for your updates anyway, which is good. And I think we probably will try and wrap it up there now. Phoebe, if there's anything else you want to add.
No.
Personally, for me, I really appreciate Andrew and Daniel taking your time to give us an insight into your business and the reasons why you do what you do. And I'll just touch on Lucinda's comments there. It is great to see a family working together in a successful business. I think that's probably one of the, for me, from the outside, looking at why you've done well with what you've done is probably your good open communication, your ability to work, multi-generational is not to be understated in the modern agriculture. So it's a tribute to you and your character. Phoebe, that's probably it from my end.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Andrew and Daniel. That's been a great lot of information that you've shared, and we really appreciate it. Thanks, Michael, for facilitating, and thanks everyone for attending.
Our pleasure. Thank you both, Michael and Phoebe, for the opportunity.
Yep, much appreciated, Andrew and Daniel. That was fantastic. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Too easy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.